Hello class, my name is Desiree. You might know me as Des in the posts that we do with each other. I am presenting the bacterial meningitis portion of our presentation with my lab partner Danielle. In my presentation, we will go over the name and structure, signs and symptoms, who, what, and where are affected by bacterial meningitis, modes of transmission, the life cycle, diagnosis and treatment, prevention and prognosis, and the challenges and solutions that we may have for bacterial meningitis. So what exactly is bacterial meningitis? It is a serious life-threatening infection. It does require prompt medical diagnosis and treatment. It is caused by several different pathogens that affect the nervous system. And bacterial meningitis is the highest global burden that we do face today. And here's a little overview of the structure of bacterial meningitis. Even though there are several different pathogens, the Neisseria meningitis is the most common pathogen that you'll find that causes the bacterial infection. So just some little key info about the structure of it. It is a capnophilic, which means it does thrive in high concentrations of carbon dioxide. It's gram-negative. You will find it in pairs in that little kidney bean form. And there are at least 12 different serotypes, and we will go over that a little bit more. And the different serotypes affect different parts of the world. So what are signs and symptoms of bacterial meningitis? Just like the viral, it does cause fever, headache, the stiff neck, nausea, vomiting, confusion. Those are some common ones. Anyone with symptoms of meningitis should seek medical care immediately because, as I mentioned, the bacterial meningitis is a life-threatening situation, and it is an acute infection, so it does happen rapidly and needs to be caught as soon as possible. So who, what, and where are affected by this infection? So it does affect humans exclusively, those with weakened immune systems, babies, children, the elderly, and any unvaccinated teens and adults. They are at higher risk to contract bacterial meningitis. What does it affect? So most people will carry this bacteria in the nasopharynx. It does invade human cells, the immune system, and the bloodstream. It does cause inflammation of the brain and spinal cord and can lead to multiple organ failure and tissue damage. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the different serotypes will affect different parts of the world. So serotypes A and C can be found in Africa. B, C, and Y are predominantly in Europe, Canada, and the United States. Serotype W is more responsible for any global epidemic outbreaks we might have. And the highest concentration of meningitis cases, you will find that in the Sahara Africa area, and because of that, it is known as the meningitis belt of the world. So how is it transmitted? This bacteria is transmitted person to person through droplets with respiratory or throat secretion. So that means coughing, sneezing. It could also mean intimate contact, such as kissing another person that is infected. Incubation period is from 2 to 10 days, with the average being about 4 days where people will show symptoms if they will develop any symptoms. An interesting fact, though, about 10% of the population does carry this bacterial pathogen in their throat at any given time. That's about 740 million people worldwide, and many of them will actually be asymptomatic. So you've been infected. What exactly happens in the process? So the bacteria does colonize the surfaces in the nasopharynx area, and actually for many reasons unknown, we don't know exactly why or how it crosses that barrier just yet, but the bacteria can sometimes cross that barrier, which then leads it down into the underlying blood vessels. From there, it does evolve towards meningitis, and the big difference with the viral and the bacterial is in the bacterial, you can develop sepsis. So it will go towards meningitis, septic shock, or a combination of the two. And then the growing bacteria invades the body, and it does induce destructive inflammatory responses, particularly if it does cross that blood-brain barrier in the membrane surrounding the brain and the spinal cord. What is the diagnosis and the treatment for this? So as I've mentioned several times, it does require immediate and medical diagnosis. A lumbar puncture is performed to retrieve that cerebral spinal fluid. It is the gold standard for diagnosing bacterial meningitis. Antibiotic administration should occur promptly. So even before they get test results back, it is recommended that they start antibiotics immediately for the best possible outcome. In the CSF analysis, that does include things like gram staining, glucose in different cultures, cell and protein count, plus some others. And that treatment, as I mentioned, does primarily focus involving the antibiotics, implementing isolation, putting in contact precautions, then consulting specialists, and then identifying any individuals at risk that may have been in contact with you. And these two different medicines here, they are the top choices for treatment because it has been shown to have great outcomes and that resistance is rarely reported. How do we prevent bacterial meningitis? The best prevention is immunization through vaccination. And as you can see here on this chart, the meningitis incident rates in the US between 1970 and 2021 have gone down significantly since the introduction of the vaccine about more than 40 years ago. However, vaccination is not possible or available, or it is hard to get that in some parts of the world. And then here you can see on this little diagram the healthcare access impact it has on the mortality rates. So the bigger the red dot, the higher the mortality rate. And you'll see that those rates are highest in the poorest country and those with limited access to healthcare. And as you can see here, right there in Africa, that's what's known as the meningitis belt of the world. So what is the prognosis and the challenges that we might face if we do have meningitis? It does have a high case fatality rate, and those that survive can face serious long-term complications. So 1 in 6 people do die from bacterial meningitis. 1 in 5 that survive from it will have severe complications, and some of those will include hearing loss, seizures and limb weakness, vision, speech, memory, or any neurological impairments, possible limb amputation if they did develop sepsis, PTSD, depression, behavioral abnormalities, and chronic pain. And of course, meningitis does remain a major global health challenge. As we've said before, it is seen across the world and particularly in the meningitis belt. It is sudden and develops rapidly at any age, which makes it difficult to catch early and begin that treatment to give you that best possible outcome. Adequate health care is needed where the rates are high. Education plays a major role in the lack of information, particularly in those poor countries. And then access to health care is difficult as well where those rates are high. Now, because of this, WHO, which is the World Health Organization, they do lead the development of a global roadmap to defeat meningitis by 2030, which involves gathering hundreds of experts, member state representatives, civil society organizations, private sectors, and they plan to do this through all these comprehensive consultations across all these different people. And that's to develop programs such as educational programs, get more healthcare workers, or implement more hospitals and centers to develop and distribute more vaccinations in some of the areas like the meningitis belt of the world. And that is called Towards a World Free of Meningitis. And that is just kind of the goal that the WHO has set forth for us. And then that pretty much just concludes my presentation portion for bacterial meningitis. This is just a small overview of those differences, those small differences that I mentioned throughout the presentation between viral and bacterial meningitis. The viral meningitis, it is caused more commonly through gastrointestinal bacteria or viruses, sorry. And it is spread through saliva or stool. And the big difference too is it can spread from animal to person or person to person. It does not lead to sepsis. It requires more supportive care. More times than not, you don't need a hospitalization, and it is pretty common. Whereas bacterial meningitis does spread through droplets from human to human only. It is an acute infection that progresses very quickly and requires immediate treatment with antibiotics, and more times than not, a hospitalization or even ICU management. And it is a major global healthcare concern that we do face today. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.